Tapping has just released Arc 7 Chapter 59B, and this video will be a summary of the chapter. I highly recommend you check out my Arc 7 Chapter 58 summary. Anyway, let's begin. Take care of your life, Flop. Self-sacrifice is a fool's errand. These were the words of advice given to Flop by Miles, the man and benefactor of Flop and Medium. Medium and Flop grew up in an orphanage which took in kids when they were young, when they had no families or places to stay. They were provided with a roof over their heads, and the children were always told that they had it lucky, as other children didn't even have a place to stay. Flop believed those words. Flop and Medium had it rough. They had to slurp mud, eat grass, insects, and the occasional rabbit. They were forced to eat grass and moss to stave off the hunger which was coming for them. Compared to living like that, the orphanage was much better. At the orphanage, they were given blankets for warmth. Despite them being tattered, they were given food, despite it being tasteless. They were given work to do and beaten occasionally. Therefore, the adults had a point when they said that the outside world was much harsher. That's why no one even thought about running away. Flop couldn't bear to see Medium and the other children get hurt, so he would ensure that the adults would have an eye on him. Flop would act exaggerated and draw attention to himself. At least that way, if an adult had a bad day, he would be the first person to receive a beating. This was the role Flop had, as he was laying there half dead and Medium was rubbing his wounds. One night, it all shattered. A man with a flying dragon appeared. He looked like a rat. The man explained he was from the same place as them, this orphanage, but he ran away when he was younger and he survived on drinking water. Miles broke the lock into the children's room and saw 20 of them in there and told all of them to wait for him. Miles then tied up all of the adults and started kicking them in the faces. Miles asked if Flop wanted to go, but he declined, and Medium and the rest of the children immediately all started beating up the tied up adults. The only person who didn't move was Flop. The children beat the adults, attacked their faces, urinated on them. Miles continued to laugh and told Flop to look, but Flop was surprised, and also surprised that his sister was joining in. With that, Miles offered the children a choice to follow him and be introduced to Miles' benefactor. Of course, the children could also stay at the orphanage. However, this was new to Flop after all. The children never had a choice before, they were just given instructions and had to follow. The children didn't react and Miles told them to come on. After beating the adults who were tied up, surely they can make a choice now. After all, they all decided to rebel. With that, the children decided to leave the orphanage, and including Medium, and Flop, wanting to be with his sister, also left the orphanage. Flop wondered if he was involved in something terrible as he slept with Medium. He looked around him and realized he no longer had walls enclosing him in. He no longer had to take the beatings anymore, or do anything that may make Medium cry. And so with that, Flop cried and cried on the taste of freedom. The scene changes. Dikka Ottoman looks at the receding flying dragons which were leaving the city of Guaral. He wonders if it's the prelude to another attack. He can come up with two possibilities: that the objective for the attack was completed, or the flying dragons retreated because they were repelled. The attack was only 1 hour long, and Dikka Ottoman believes that the first option would be preferable. He also notes that the southern region of the city got cold. Something like that was not possible. One might call it an act of God, especially since the flying dragons are weak to the cold. The second anomaly was the white light, which devastated the the southern part of the city. He speculates that the attackers had something to do with it. Either way, he surmises that Mazelda or Priscilla most likely had something to do with it. Dikka Ottoman of course knew that when a city is too strong to breach due to the walls, then it's only logical that flying dragons could be used to bypass that wall. And of course, a divine general would arrive. They believed that after Arakia's defeat, it would take a long time for another divine general to show up, but they were wrong. However, this was to be expected, since this movement was a rebellion, and it would be wise to crush the rebellion when the flames are still small. Regardless, Dikka Ottoman thinks that they need to repair the walls of the city. However, he stops reflecting on the battle when he hears a shout. We see that someone is being told to drop their weapons. The man was a dual-wielding warrior which was released from the jail to repel the flying dragons. Since the incident was over, he was being told to go back to jail. Dikka approaches him. The man asks if Dikka thinks he will surrender to him, saying that Dikka Ottoman is nothing but a womanizer. However, Dikka Ottoman states that the man is free to go for the work he has done, and the man is confused. And Dikka states that the punishment is the law of Wallachia, and that is the emperor's wish. After all, Dikka Ottoman holds the same ideals as Vincent. Vincent believes that work and merit should be rewarded. The man glares at Dikka, and we see that he's wearing an eye patch over one eye. The man asks how Dikka, who is rebelling against the empire, can have that view. However, Dikka Ottoman says that he's the same as the man. They're both loyal to the emperor. The eye patch man drops his weapon, and Dikka says that he has a story to tell, but wants to know the man's name. The man replies that it's Jamal. Dikka introduces himself and states that he's fine with his title, and if he's a coward or a womanizer. However, someone calls for Dikka Ottoman. We see a young man appear and approach Dikka. Dikka is unaware of what the man's rank is, or what the reason for his arrival is, but he most likely arrived during the fighting. Dikka wonders if he's a messenger from the royal capital of Wallachia, but he's brushed off by the man. Jamal says that he was speaking to Dikka first, and the man apologizes but wants permission, and then the man continues stating that he wants him and his allies to repair the town. We also see that Mazelda arrives, covered in blood. Not her own blood though. She pats the unknown young man on the shoulder and states that the young man has already started his work, and Mazelda can vouch for him. Dikka looked at the young man's eyes. There was a great focus in them, and Dikka asks who he was, and the man replied that his name was Otto Subaru, and he was looking for a friend and his friend's sister. The scene changes. Miles' master, Selena Dracoi, was a matriarch. She was a young woman who rose up the ranks. However, she didn't use her authority to bully the weak. That's the reason why the children Miles brought home would not be ill-treated. Selena tells the children to do as they please on her lands. Flop smelled nice. He had a hot wash and ate a nice meal. Miles explains that the adults at the orphanage also beat him up when he was younger. The siblings were touched with all of the new sensations they felt. As Flop and Medium ran around the house, a voice calls out to them from the garden. As Flop peers into the bushes, he gets poked in the head and stumbles. We see that the person who did this was a 12 or 13-year-old boy with brown hair. We see that the boy has a flying dragon egg with him, and Flop asks what they'll do with it, and the boy says that they will hatch it. This is how Flop and Medium met the man who would become their brother-in-law for life, Balleroy. The scene changes. The threat of the flying dragons is more than just knowledge. They have claws, wings, deadly teeth, no different from the dangerous animals in the jungle like this giant snake. It's strange to think people would use dragons for an attack on a city. Rem looks outside of the mansion window and sees a flying dragon being fed by a soldier. Of course they're supposed to be vicious, but here's one being fed by a soldier. A voice rings out saying Rem looks a bit melancholic, but Rem doesn't recognize the person. Rem just states that she didn't come here on her own volition. Appearing, there was an old man with a white beard. He had a high rank considering that the soldiers were bowing to him. With that, the old man raised his arm and the soldiers left the room. The man asks if he can sit down and Rem says yes. We see that Rem is under house arrest at this mansion. The old man and Rem discuss what's going on, and we see that Madeleine wasn't following her actual orders, and that the whims of another factor influenced the Madeleine. In other words, referring to Rem herself. Rem asks who the man is, and the man introduces himself as the Prime Minister of Wallachia. The Prime Minister of Wallachia confirms that he's the enemy of Vincent Abelard's. Rem is caught off guard about the situation, but it should have been Priscilla, Subaru or Abel as the person who was sitting here right now. However, thinking about it, Rem is glad Subaru wasn't here. After all, if he was here, he would have done something reckless. Rem wonders how Subaru will feel when he realizes that Rem has been taken, and it pains her chest. With that, Rem asks the Prime Minister if he knows that Abel is the true Emperor, and the Prime Minister says that he is aware, but it was his mistake letting Abel escape. Rem asks why this is happening to Abel, and she's told that the Emperor is someone who has a great track record, competence, trust, and fulfilling responsibilities. In other words, the rebellion is happening not for emotional reasons. Rem asks why Abel wasn't qualified to be an emperor. Rem didn't want to defend Abel, but the fact that Subaru and Dikka Ottoman was convinced by his opinions show that he has leadership. The Prime Minister asks Rem for her name, and she gives it. And then she is asked how many heirs does she think Vincent has at the moment, and Rem says none, and the Prime Minister agrees. The Prime Minister continues, stating without heirs the country will. However, he cuts himself off. Rem wonders why she was being told all of this, and the Prime Minister responds that Rem is not only a healer but also a demon, so she is precious. And the Prime Minister states that he wants to talk to her in the future. With that, he left, and again Rem looks out of the window, noticing that the man had finished feeding the flying dragon and they flew up into the air. The scene changes. Flop wakes up, noticing the ceiling. Usually it's Medium who is the vigilant one. Flop feels immense pain. We see that Flop cannot move properly. We see that Madeleine is standing next to him and tells him to not move around, and Flop states that he remembers having a session with her. Madeleine confirms it and states that she attacked him, but Rem healed him up. Flop asks Madeleine what happened to the city of Guaral, but Madeleine doesn't respond. Flop asks if Madeleine is sulking, stating that his sister Medium does the same due to her size. Madeleine denies Flop's statement and confirms that Guaral is safe. Flop was glad that Rem was able to understand his words, and Madeleine explains that Rem has been brought here also, and that Rem is expected to keep her promise, and that Madeleine will keep her promise also because dragons keep their promises. A dragon fang is placed in front of Flop's face, and Flop thanks Madeleine for picking it up for him, and Madeleine says the words Carillion. As Flop tries to grab the fang, Madeleine avoids his hand. Madeleine then asks again why Flop has Carillion's fang. Flop explains that he was there when Carillion was born, and he raised Carillion with Balleroy and Miles, and when Carillion was regrowing fangs, him and Medium were given fangs as souvenirs. Flop wants to know Madeleine's connection to Balleroy and Carillion, and then realizes that Madeleine took Balleroy's spot as a 9 Divine General, therefore she may have known him. Flop wanted to know about Madeleine and her relationship with Balleroy, and Flop asked why Madeleine became a 9 Divine General, and she says for revenge. Flop of course can relate to that word, after all his goal in life is revenge, but not on a person, but on the world itself. Madeleine says she will get revenge on the person who killed Balleroy, who was her mate. Madeleine, who did not know how to cry, just burned in anger. Flop asks Madeleine how she can have vengeance, and Madeleine states who let Balleroy die. That's when Flop thinks about his past and his memories, and then he states, "You are Balleroy's foe. Ha, village chieftain. No, Emperor Vincent Valakia." And the chapter ends. Thanks to Ice for that translation. Go to his Twitter to get the latest news on rezero. But yeah, that's the chapter. So I just want to say, it was as I predicted, that Otto and the rest of the characters are inside Guaral. It seems like Otto is helping out with Mazelda. I'm assuming that's going to be covered in like a side story. It seems like Madeleine's partner was actually Balleroy, and that's the reason why she became a 9 Divine General, to figure out who killed Balleroy. But of course, the issue with that is that Julius was the one behind Balleroy's death, but Julius's name was Eaton. So, you know, I'm assuming Madeleine, due to that effect, Madeleine now blames Vincent Valakia. From memories in EX4, Balleroy was a sacrificial pawn, and his rebellion was actually planned by Vincent anyway. So Balleroy actually died in vain, because he was trying to stop a rebellion. So it was kind of planned. So yeah, it seems like Flop sort of... I don't feel like Flop will now become an enemy. I feel like Flop and Madeleine will join Vincent. I feel like Vincent will spin it, because he will say, "Oh, look, the rebellion was actually caused by the Prime Minister. You know, I'm trying to, you know, take over the situation here. I'm gonna root out the corruption. So if you join me alongside Madeleine, we can actually get revenge on the person who orchestrated everything." And, you know, Flop will join. Like, I don't feel like Flop will fight Rem, Subaru, Medium, etc., etc. He's too good-natured. Rem seems to be in the royal capital of Valakia with the Prime Minister. I'm not sure, like, the weird sexual, "you're precious, Rem, you're a demon and a healer." I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's like a rehash of Arc 5 with like Emilia getting taken and being Regulus's wife, and now Rem is being seen as a commodity, especially since the context was Vincent having children. I mean, by the way, like, it seems Vincent was only outed because he wasn't sleeping with women, which I think Ice in the Witch Cult Translation Discord server was talking about how this sort of happened to Stride Valakia, who was infertile. So some parallels are being drawn there. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of strange that the reason for this whole arc is because Vincent wasn't sleeping with women. So that's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the chapter. Kind of long, but yeah.